Today we have Uri Hacohen from Tel Aviv University, who's going to be telling us about copyright regenerated. And thank you very much for joining us at 8 p.m. your time.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks everyone. It's great to be with you virtually and to talk about this project. It's actually a series of projects where Niva and I, Niva is also here, we're trying to explore a point that we think is a bit underemphasized in the literature, we can say, talking about the relationship between generative AI technology and copyright law. So I assume that with this audience, we shouldn't go into explaining what generative AI technology do and how does it work. But let me just say that we know that this technology operates in several expressive domains. It can generate text. It can be helpful in creating software code and creating the short GIFs. This application from Meta is a bit old by now. In the middle is GitHub Copilot, Microsoft GitHub. So, in all these domains, we know that copyright is essentially govern these creations, and it's an interesting question how copyright intersects with these generative works. And here are some fun examples. This very famous picture by Jason Allen won first prize in the Colorado State Fair art competition, although Jason was never considered himself an artist. This is another example of a photo created by DALL-E 2 on the Cosmopolitan cover. So we see these examples coming out, and it's interesting to think about that from the prism of copyright. And the interesting thing for me as a copyright scholar is that we don't really know what copyright law, what the courts will do, what legislators will do. We all have our opinions, but it's not clear what the law will be because there are strong arguments at both sides, and it's unclear how the dust will settle. So let's look at the main consideration, the main pathologies here. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm using OpenAI examples here. It's an old presentation, but we can imagine Bard or Gemini is now the new one, right? So when we have a chatbot, and assuming it learns from a lot of data, it's a foundation model, so we can ask the model to generate a piece of work for me. We can say, please write me a piece of text about the Israeli conflict, and then it generates a piece of text. And we can assume that as part of the input that I gave it as a prompt, the model also learned from a rich corpus of data from the internet. And for our purposes, we can assume that nearly everything is copyrighted. Now, it's not always true. Much of the work is in the public domain, meaning it's old, it's no longer protected by the law. At other times, it is copyrighted, but it's licensed. So it can be licensed for various purposes, including for machine learning. And if it's okay to train, then all is good. But let's assume that it's copyrighted and it gets full protection. We also have the same problem with other domains. It can be music, it can be sound, it can be, in the case of DALL-E 2, when we create images of this weird dog. I think it's called the Commodore dog or something like that. Again, the model learned from many images. Many of them we can assume are copyrighted, or pictures of mops, in this case, also can be copyrighted. So essentially, we have two main questions here. There are other questions that I'm ignoring for this talk, for example, whether or not the output images are themselves copyrighted. But there are two main questions here. The first question are the blue arrows, whether the fact that the data goes into the model was trained on this data, whether this by itself an act of copyright infringement, whether the model can learn without authorization from large corpuses of information without obtaining consent, whether this by itself constitutes copyright infringement. This is one question. And one related question is the question of the output. assuming that the model is fair game, what happens now when the model creates an output which is, to use copyright jargon, substantially similar to protected expression coming from one of the instances, one of the examples in the training dataset. So for example, this piece of text is highly similar to this one. This dog is very similar to this one. Is it a copyright infringement in this case? And these questions are not merely academic. We see many lawsuits coming in. These examples from some of the early ones. The one at the top is a class action against Microsoft GitHub and OpenAI, arguing that the Copilot actually outputs substantially similar code. Below is a lawsuit to Getty Images against Stable Diffusion. Again, you see a photo that is maybe similar, I'm not sure. We can also see that the watermark of Getty Images was also attempted to be copied. There is a trademark argument there. I don't think there is a likelihood of confusion here, but these are the sorts of claims we see. And there are many, many more examples like this. There are, I think, more than 20, 30, maybe 40 lawsuits by now, all arguing these type of questions. And the most common one recently is the New York Times versus OpenAI, when they show substantial pieces of text. And of course, Google also have their share. So I will try not to talk too much about the input part, because although this question is not solved, at least in the academia, there are many people, and Niva and I among them, who believe that the mere act of learning should not be considered copyright infringement. Between lawyers, we can debate whether it's a defense for copyright infringement, or whether this is something that is not infringing ab initio, never infringing. Whatever the right classification of this is, I tend to think that the mere act of learning, assuming that we only create models, the output of this training is the creation of a machine learning model. This by itself should not be copyright infringement. There are other people, this is a paper by Mark Lemley and Brian Casey, also arguing that the mere act of learning should not be considered copyright infringement. We have a very interesting opinion from the Israeli Ministry of Justice, one of the first of this kind of its type in the world, actually preempting the courts by saying, of course, this is not binding, but it's an opinion saying that we believe that the act of learning should not be considered copyright infringement. Now, even if we do pass this step and we said that the act of learning is fine, the act of learning is itself not infringing copyright, we still have to deal with the question of the output. This, I think, is the more interesting question, because what happens if now the model is creating something that is substantially similar to my work, and my work appeared in the input? So we hear about memorization everywhere, and memorization becomes such a buzzword. What happens when the model memorizes? And the question was whether memorization actually equates to plagiarism. When the model memorizes pieces of information, does it mean that the model also infringes copyright? And I think this was the motivated question that led us into this research. The observation was that no, memorization does not equate to copyright infringement. As a matter of fact, most likely it's the opposite. So a situation when the model memorizes things, pieces of information from the text, might be okay. Essentially, copyright law encourages people and machines to learn and to use pieces of information that are not protected. And if the model reproduces these pieces of unprotected knowledge, then it's fine. It's not an act of copyright infringement. So I'll try to exemplify it in several ways. So first, let's look at this Karnini et al. Actually from Google, partly from Google paper. And it's a very interesting example. This lady, Anne Garham Lutz, which is, I learned recently, an American preacher. So they use this example to show that if we assume that this photo is copyrighted, it actually wasn't. It's a public domain picture. the model was actually able to reproduce it. And they use this procedure to show that. But by now, it's pretty clear that models can actually memorize specific instances from the training data. It's possible, it's a possibility. But does it mean that if the models do it, it's a copyright infringement? So first of all, not always. For example, it's pretty clear that if the model would reproduce just Mrs. Lotz's eye or pieces of her shirt or of her hair or just some pearls from her necklace, clearly it won't be copyright infringement. So it's a question of how much is being memorized and what sort of memorization is it. Even if we assume that a complete memorization of the full picture, like in here, also it's not the same resolution, it's a bit different. But even if we say it's a memorization one for one, and it is possibly a copyright infringement in this case, it's still interesting to know which kind of picture it is, because it's possible that the copyright here, the legal protection for this work, is very slim, is very narrow, which means that if the output photo is a bit changed, let's say a different color of the shirt, I changed the earring, I changed the necklace, I put a little something in the hair, maybe now it's no longer copyright infringement. Maybe now it's fair game. Now it's hard to draw clear lines here, but it's important to recognize that this specific photo, again, it's a public domain photo, but let's assume it was copyrighted. It's not highly creative. It's not highly original. The reason is, first of all, it's not a drawing of Mrs. Lotz, it's a photo. And courts have recognized that photography, as opposed to the creative arts, drawing, is less original medium because many of the elements within the photos are essentially reflections of facts. So the anatomy of how the body looks, the eyes, the nose, the different proportions in the face, these are not protected elements. These are elements that are freely copied, they're freely used, they're not protected by law. Other elements can be protected from the beginning, ab initio, but they lose their protection once they become ingrained in culture. We call it scène faire. So for example, the shape of the collar. Color can be shaped in very different ways, but that's the way humanity looks at colors with this pointy thing. So it's not protected. Again, the shape of pearls, the shape of a suit. Many of these elements are not protected. So even if the photo as a whole is protected, many of its elements are not protected. And if the photo contains many unprotected elements, it means that the work of art as a whole obtains protection, but a very slim protection. Minor changes can change the legal outcome. Okay, so in this paper, we developed this idea, which we call the genericide principle. And copyright doesn't recognize, at least not explicitly, a genericide doctrine. Genericide, from the term generic, means that something is very common and therefore generic. Copyright doesn't look at genericide explicitly. Genericide is actually a term of art used in trademark law. But we do think, and this is something we emphasize in this paper, is that copyright implicitly considers genericity within considers the originality of creative works. Now, the concept of originality is a slippery one in copyright law. It's not clear how the court defines originality. The best hint we get is from this Supreme Court case, the Feist case from 1991. And there the court was actually faced with a lawsuit by a phone company against another phone company that copied the phone book. And the first company said to the second, hey, you copied our phone book. And the court says, no, it's true that they copy, and that they proved copying without a doubt. They actually put some fake numbers there to show that it's an exact replica. But the court said, even though you copied, it's not a legal copy because whatever you copied is not legally protected. And the thing that wasn't protected was the way the numbers and the names were ordered. They were ordered alphabetically. And the court said, ordering things alphabetically is not something that is protected by copyright law because it's an old age practice firmly rooted in tradition and so commonplace that it became to be expected as a matter of course. Okay, so this is the definition of originality. Actually, it's a negative definition. Something is not original when it is so commonplace that it has become to be expected. Now, if something is so generic, so commonplace, so firmly rooted in tradition, it doesn't necessarily mean that the copyrighted work gets no protection at all, but again, it means that the protection is very slim. Only verbatim copy can be infringement. Okay, and we say that when we copyright law considers originality twice. First, it considers it when the work is created. I draw this photo and I say whether this work is actually protected by copyright law. And at this stage, the initial stage, the standard of originality is very low. Everything that is marginally original, mildly original, will be protected. But the actual scope of the right, this is the y-axis here, how strong the copyright is, which kind of work are considered actually to be infringement and which kind of works are not infringing. This is something that the courts actually have to evaluate ex post when we file an infringement suit. So you created something, I create something that is a bit similar, a bit different. We go to court, the court have to evaluate whether there is an infringement. And at this point, at the second time, when there is an infringement litigation, the court asks many questions, invoke many doctrines, and we show in the paper that in many of these doctrines, there is this implicit notion of genericity plays a part. So if something, for example, there is the doctrine merger, the merger doctrine, sorry. The merger doctrine says that if an idea has merged with an expression, okay, so if I draw a bee, but the shape of the bee is how a bee looks like, the same number of legs, the same number, the location of the wings. Once the shape of the bee and my specific expression of the bee merges, then there is no protection because essentially I draw a bee and there is no other ways to draw a bee. There's the useful article doctrine that says that when something becomes useful, partly because it was used so many times, there is the Google Oracle case, when the court says that part of the API of the Java interfaces was used by so many programmers for so long that it became so commonplace, it became functional. Now they have to use it. It enjoys these network effects. Like the QWERTY keypad. When something becomes functional, it is no longer protected by copyright law. We have the Senefer doctrine. When some things became so ingrained in culture, okay, think a wizard with a pointy hat and a staff. The idea of a wizard, the figure of a wizard, a stock characters, a superhero with a cape, very muscular with something on the chest. The mere configuration of a superhero is not protected. We have free speech doctrines. So in text, for example, when a combination of words is become part of language, it become idiomic expression, phrases, no longer protected. Again, this is the same logic that says when something becomes so ingrained in culture, so ingrained in our tradition, it no longer deserves copyright protection, or the protection should be narrowed. So there is this direct relationship between how original a work is, originality can be measured partly by genericity, and the scope, the legal scope of protection that copyright law affords this work. So again, this is a list of examples. I don't need to go into all of them. Ingrained cultural themes. So this IB Irish Road case. It's about an act. We can take the Romeo and Juliet story. It will be easier. If the mere idea of families who loves one another, the families have conflict with one another. I mean, at this high level of abstraction, cultural themes, ideas are not protected because they become so commonplace. Standardized interfaces, the Lotus case, the Google case, Google Oracle, again, part of APIs that being used so many times by software programmers become ingrained in language, no longer protected. Acknowledge artistic styles. Once something stops being very unique expression and become an artistic style, no longer protected. Stock characters not protected. Common harmonic progressions not protected. Conventional music arrangements, and so forth. So we do think, and again, it's not a perfect fit, but we do think that the notion of genericity can inform courts, can inform regulators about how original a work is, and then they can help the courts in actually tailoring the legal protection for these works. Okay, so if we say that part of the information within expressive works is not protected, partly because it's generic, partly because of other reasons, for example, facts are not protected. Ideas are not protected. So by definition, if we look at binary systems, if we say, for example, differential privacy, I don't want the model to access any particular instance in the training set, then such approaches are by definition over-inclusive, right? They prevent the model from accessing many elements of information that are actually not protected, that we can use, that copyright encourages us to use, to build upon and create new stuff. So how we can use generative AI technology to actually help us deal with this problem of over-inclusiveness. So we introduced this relatively old paper by Zaho et al. That talks about generalization and bias in generative models, and it asks the basic question about generalization. Assuming that the model was trained only on red buses, blue cars, and red cars, can the model actually generalize and create something that was not observed in the data set, like a blue bus? And the answer is, of course, yes. I mean, that's the entire purpose of generative models, to generalize and to create, new and appealing instances that they didn't see in the training set. But we clearly know that no matter how the model is adjusted, on which model we use, the data always creates a bias. The data always creates a shadow that impacts the way the model generalizes. So for example, if the model was trained only on these geometric shapes, and every time each image has only 2 geometric shapes in it, and there are different colors, different combination, but everyone is just two geometric shapes, then the model can actually memorize this feature. It can create 2 geometric shapes. It didn't memorize the photos themselves. It's different shapes, different colors, different location, but it memorized the fact that there's actually 2 shapes in each image. It can also generalize and create other instances. It can create 3 shapes and 1 shape. But the model will still, by definition, always will be biased towards the instances that it saw. So if the frequency of 2 shapes in the training set was very high, then the frequency at the output stage will reflect that. The model will be more likely to create 2 shapes than it is to create 3 shapes or 1 shape. Okay, and we can also exemplify this pretty intuitive point by using in-painting techniques. So if we take, for example, this famous Magritte painting, A Son of Man, and we erase the apple in front of the man's face, will the model actually memorize the apple? And the answer is no. The model will much more likely to complete it with a human face, because the model naturally sees a lot more human faces in front of someone who looks like a male in a suit than apples in front of faces. So the model actually brings back the more salient expressive element and not the more rare expressive element. We can also do it with Mrs. Lutz. If we erase the earring, we get different types of earring every time. Okay, so if we need to sum up what I was saying so far, memorization of information does not always mean that we have a copyright infringement. Actually, many times it doesn't say that. The instances where memorization actually says that there is infringement is more likely when the memorization occurs against the natural bias of the data. So when the memorization occurs against the bias that the data itself created, then it's more likely that there is a copyright infringement, because it means that the model actually memorized elements that are pretty rare, elements that are pretty original. Conversely, if the model memorizes things that are very salient, very hugely common, then it's possible that it's not copyright infringement because these elements are not protected. They're too generic, they're too common, and the model and copyright either one, not protect them at all, or if it protects them, it protects them much narrowly. Okay, so if we go back, for example, to the Son of Man, if the model would reproduce the apple, then we can say, yeah, this is a memorization for sure, because the photo of a guy with an apple in front of his face, that's pretty original. There's not many of them. There are many more people with just regular faces. But for as long as the model memorizes a human face, it's not a memorization in the legal sense, because it's probably generic. It's not protected. Now, when I say natural, I'll just say two things about that. When you say natural bias, what I mean by natural is essentially what we're saying is we should let the data talk, right? We have big data sets. What machine learning does is learn these connections. This actually can tell us better than any person which elements in our culture, in our speech, are more salient, are more common, are more likely that we're going to need to use them to create more expression, more free speech, and which elements are more original and deserve stronger protection. But we give the data talk based on what the corpus of data is. So we do have to think about what we consider natural. How does the corpus of data actually represent the real world? Does the corpus of data actually reflects our expressive domains and our cultural domains? So for example, should the models be able to access shadow libraries of pirated materials? I don't think so, because if we allow the model to be trained on pirated materials, we essentially dilute the originality of works by many instances of works that appear in our culture, although they appear in culture because they were pirated. They're not naturally appear in culture, they appear in culture because they were pirated. So yes, probably we shouldn't be allowed to access pirated material. Should we be allowed to access material that is behind paywalls? I don't know, more complex question. But the important point is that however we define this natural status quo of cultural domain, cultural expression, once we have this universe in front of us, the model can help us distinguish which elements are more generic and which elements are not. Okay, and how can we use this insight? I think we can use it in two interesting ways. One way is to try to figure out which elements, which expressive elements are so generic that they're no longer protected. Okay, if we'll go back to the Feist case, like the way the phone book was arranged alphabetically. Things that are so unoriginal, so generic, so commonplace, maybe we shouldn't recognize them at all. So for example, if we think about text, I mean, idiomic expressions that become part of language, not protected. Maybe we can use generative models to actually know which phrases are not protected. We can use the same idea for images. So for example, if a photo of specific type of cat from in the front, no background, at some point becomes so generic, maybe we shouldn't protect it, or again, protect it very slimly. But I think it will be more interesting to actually measure originality and provide courts and regulators with these metrics of how original my work is. So this piece of text, part of it is more salient, part of it is more original. The combination of words is the model can create a number for me, an originality score of 4. Okay, now the court can incorporate this information when the court, for example, do an infringement analysis. It doesn't mean that if the number is 3, I will lose, and the number is 9, I will win, but it's an input. It inputs that allow the court now to incorporate this degree of originality into all these different doctrines that courts implicitly considers originality, but just don't do it accurately and don't do it in a way that we can follow and we can scrutinize. The same goes for images. Again, we can try to measure how original a photo is and have an originality score for this. Okay, so essentially what we're proposing is that generative models can measure genericity. Genericity does not equate to originality, but it's a contributing factor. It can inform courts what is originality, how it is better to perceive the notion of originality. And once we can conceive and measure the concept of originality, then we can use it. Courts, regulators, the Copyright Office, for example, when consider which works to register or not. These policymakers can actually delineate the legal scope of the copyrighted work. And this information can help us in various contexts. For example, registration. Should I register a work that was generated by generative AI? Maybe the originality score of this work can help the court determine, instead of opting for a binary option, which this is what the court do now. Now the court says, okay, if you use generative AI application, sorry, not the court, the Copyright Office. If you use generative AI, then you deserve no protection at all. Maybe we should find a solution that is more nuanced. It can help us with licensing. If I want to license copyrighted works that has a high originality score, maybe not today, but in the future, when much of the work will be generated by generative AI, maybe we do care about how much original my work is, how much expression I'm adding to the aggregated expressive knowledge that the model already familiar with. Something that is highly original, maybe worth more money. And of course, this is the main motivation. It can inform the courts. When the courts consider infringement action, when the courts consider standards like fair use, the courts can incorporate into the analysis questions of originality. Again, it will not be a binary answer. We cannot reduce the question of fair use to a number, but the courts can use this number when they consider vague concepts like transformativeness and like originality and so forth. Okay, so I would like to end with these quotes. I'm good with the time, right? You're right. So I like to end with these quotes that I like from very famed judges, Oliver Wendell Holmes, that said that it would be a dangerous undertaking for a person trained only in law to constitute themselves final judges of the worth of pictorial illustrations outside the narrowest and most obvious limits. So essentially, we are judges, we are boring people, we shouldn't evaluate art. And then there's another famous judge, Learned Hand, that says that there is a point in the series of abstractions when abstractions are no longer protected, since otherwise the playwright, in this case, could prevent the use of ideas which are apart from their expression, his property never extended. Nobody has ever been able to fix this boundary, nobody ever can. Again, the idea is that copyright law distinguish between ideas, abstract ideas, not protected, specific expression is protected. Now, these judges always recognize that trying to evaluate concepts like originality or trying to draw the boundaries between ideas and expression is something that by definition nobody can do. We have all these events when we can ask judges, what do you think, is this fair use? And it's always 50% says yes, 50% says no. So these standards are vague. These standards are difficult to determine in advance. They're different to follow and they're difficult to analyze. And we believe that with the aid of AI, we can use a measure that even if it's not a perfect measure, it can inform copyright analysis and make it more explicit, more easy to follow, and more predictable. Thank you.